I stumbled upon this sub a few nights ago, reading all the backwoods encounters reminded me of one me and my family had when I was a child. I grew up in a military brat. My dad was stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, and we took advantage of all the outdoors had to offer. Most often we frequented Farmington Canyon, which was gorgeous during the fall. I think it was about an hour or so drive, and I still remember the dirt road we took was quite dangerous at times due to its position against rock walls on one side and the edge of a cliff or steep drop. So dangerous that vehicles often had to slow down and carefully go around oncoming traffic. There were moments where I could peer out of my window and see nothing but tiny colorful trees far, far below. I remember this trip in particular because it was a real treat to go camping in the tent with my family and our 2 dogs. It was the 90s, but we were still using an old 70s style metal frame tent we picked up at a garage sale. Since my father had so many back issues, we were often restricted to day trips, cabins, or hotels, so this is something I was super excited about. We arrived to a campsite in the late afternoon and chose a spot next to the creek. We set up our tent and settled in for the evening. The evening was relatively enjoyable and yet uneventful. The fire we built was now simmering ashes, and we decided to call it a night. Doused the fire and crawled into our sleeping bags. Later that night I woke to one of our dogs growling. Earlier we did see rabbits, and I figured that's why he was growling, just some critter moving around. I soon realized he was growling at the sound of what was clearly crunching footsteps on gravel. My heart stopped, my breathing froze, and every muscle in my body went rigid. Unsure of what I should do, I just laid there terrified. He seemed to move around, inspecting different areas of the camp, including our tent, and trying to get into our vehicle. The increased volume of my dog growling must have alerted him, and he soon left the camp. Soon after, my father, who had been awake the entire time as well, I'm guessing unsure of what to do, decided that when the moment of potential danger had passed, to wake my mom and siblings, who surprisingly slept through all of it, pack up our gear, and get out as fast as possible. We were, of course, talking all about it on the trip back. It was around 1 a.m. I still remember the time, and I don't think anyone slept much at all that night, even safely back at our own beds. Not much of a climax, I suppose, but it sure scared me to death at the time, and it is burned into my memory. Oddly enough, I remember seeing carloads of college kids, I'm assuming based on the comments of my dad at the time, but I could be totally wrong, hauling up this dangerous canyon road in the middle of the night. Still no idea who that person was, if they were lost from one, if the other campsites, a passerby looking for an opportunity, or someone who lives out the woods, preying on campers. I'm from a remote village in northern Alaska, and I've seen some things. As the title says, I'm from a remote Alaska. I grew up with stories of old creatures and legends, but I've also seen some things. I'm typing this on my phone, so I apologize if I misspell anything, but hear what I have to say. My village is roughly 250 miles northwest of Fairbanks, Alaska. It is situated in the mountains and surrounded by the national park, so there's already suspicion of supernatural entities there. Growing up, I was always told about the Inuthigarok, or the little people. These smaller humanoids are of smaller proportions, and they are strong, fast, very smart, and they even speak an old dialect of the language of the area they live in. At a distant point in time, we lived alongside them and hunted for them with them out in the Nuwa or tundra. But as one family was visiting another, a human's dog ate the little one's child, and so became a grudge that some still hold today towards humans. There are stories of people being lured away from their homes, just be tricked and left out in the middle of nowhere. There are also stories of them helping us humans in times of need. Like from my village, caribou were herded by a small blurry thing towards a group of people, according to the story from the 60s or 70s, and there was a good harvest of animals that fall. There are also stories of the Inukabak, or big person, sometimes called Bigfoot by people, even though they don't always look like an ape-like human. The old stories talk of giants that roamed the land in silence or in anger. One story even tells of a cannibalistic one out west near Nome or Kotzebue. Back home they come out and around when the caribou do, like the Inukarat, and will either be mischievous or just watchful of humans. In my personal experiences, I've seen the little ones and the big ones. They both can resemble humans or just a blur on the land. I believe they're part of another world or dimension, and that's why they cannot always be seen, but hey, we may never know. Father-son camping trip didn't go as planned. This story happened just this summer. I'm only now getting around to writing it down. I would consider myself an outdoorsman. I grew up in the sticks. I've spent a lot of my time wandering in and enjoying the backcountry. I'm older now and I've settled down in the suburbs. Wife, 2 boys, a house, a dog, a desk job, the whole suburban shtick. I want opportunities for my kids that come from suburban life, but I also want them to grow up with the appreciation of the outdoors. So, when my oldest son was big enough for his first solo father-son camping trip, I was excited. My wife and younger son stayed home for this mid-summer trip. It was going to be a great bonding experience for me and my son because my son is just 5. I don't want to do anything too extreme on our first big solo camping trip. We needed a place that wasn't too deep into the Colorado Front Range, but still allowed for dispersed camping. I don't consider camping in RV parks or established campgrounds to be actual camping. You might as well be a motel watching TV. Camping, at most, is a tent, sleeping bag, and a fire. A dispersed camping area called Gordon Gulch west of Boulder caught my attention. I'd never been to this area before. There were no facilities and it was dispersed enough you couldn't see or hear any other campers nearby. My son and I head up last that day. We set up camp, collected firewood, went for a hike, saw a moose and a bobcat, tried a little fishing, and finally, as the sunlight faded, we returned to our campsite to light a fire. We had a traditional and nutritious camping meal, fire burned hot dogs and marshmallows. It was a good day. Definitely a core memory for both my son and me. The perfect first camping experience for a preschooler, or so I thought. After all that fun, my son and I were exhausted. It was time for bed. The sound of an evening summer breeze through the pines is better than any commercial sleep aid. I don't even remember drifting off. It was a hard, dreamless sleep that only physical exertion can bring. One thing about my son, he inherited many things from me. Hair, color, eye shape, disposition, and my unnaturally wide feet. But one peculiar thing he got from his mother was sleep talking. It's not unusual to hear him having full conversations in his sleep. It gets more pronounced when he's overly tired. I was capsulated out of the void of sleep, not sure what aroused me. I sat up collecting myself. The world seemed to be at peace. It was quiet, just me and the breeze through the treetops. I couldn't figure out what woke me so suddenly. The sound of my son laughing in the sleep cut through my groggy confusion. It was a deep belly laugh. It must be a fun dream, I thought hazily. Gently rocking him was enough to quiet him down. It must have been a good enough startled me, I determined. As I repositioned to fall back asleep, my son burst out laughing. I sighed and closed my eyes. He'll quiet down soon enough, I thought. He laughed again. This time his laugh was echoed by something outside our tent. I held my breath and listened, unsure of what I just heard. It wasn't an echo. There was something out there and it was laughing in unison with my son. My grogginess vanished as the adrenaline began to pump. It couldn't be real. It had to be imagination. I sat up in my sleeping bag listening to the night. Hearing nothing after a minute, my muscles relaxed. I started to settle back down, must have been hearing things. I was tired after all. Checking the time, I saw it was 4 a.m. The sun would be up in a couple hours. My son laughed again and again. It was answered with laughter outside. I was now absolutely certain it was not an echo. As I tried to make sense of what was happening, the voice outside called out my son's name. My blood ran cold. That voice, it was so familiar. Then it clicked in my brain. It was the voice of my younger son. That wasn't at all possible. He was safe at home with my wife, miles and miles away. I could hear twigs crunching beyond our thin nylon tent walls. It was impossible to tell the distance from us, but there was something out there, circling us. Unprompted this time, it called out my son's name in the little toddler voice. My 5-year-old, still fast asleep, called out to his brother, asking him to play. The thing outside the tent laughed in reply and urged my son to come outside. That thing with my little son's voice sounded cold, hollow, dead. The floodgates of my journal burst open. Cold sweat formed on my face. I was frightened out of my mind, but my primal caveman brain roared to life. I was in Papa Bear mode. Nothing was going to take or hurt my son. I was putting a stop to this. Whatever it was out there, I didn't care. You don't mess with my kids. Say what you will, but when you're camping miles from anything, it's not worth the risk of being unarmed. Wild animals, wild people, you have to be prepared. I almost always take a firearm with me when I'm camping. Pepper spray and bear bells are great, but nothing gets attention from a conscious threat faster than the sound of a chambering around. I spoke loudly into the night that I had a gun and was coming out. I hoped the fear in my voice was masked by my aggressiveness. The only reply was the breeze through the treetops. My son was still asleep. Kay's a hard sleeper, another trait from his mom. My wife and I have joked that he could sleep through a tornado. Stepping out into the cool summer night, a gun in one hand and a flashlight in another, I surveyed the campsite. The fire was down to embers. Our fishing gear was leaning against the pickup. The firewood was still neatly stacked. Nothing seemed out of place. Not wanting to stray far from the tent or my sleeping son, I sat down outside the entrance. I waited in the dark with the flashlight off. Not far into the trees I heard a branch break, then another snap. This time closer. I stood up and flashed my light in the direction of the sound. Nothing was there. The voice called out, this time from behind, and this time focused towards me. Daddy, Daddy. It was my youngest son's voice again, crying out for me from the dark forest. Out through the light beam in that direction, a pair of shimmering green eyes were illuminated by my flashlight. They were only 2 or so feet above the ground, the same height as a toddler. I took a small step forward. I wanted to see more. I needed to see more. The eyes, unblinking, remained in place. Getting closer didn't help reveal this thing. It seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, almost devouring it. I couldn't make out its size or shape or color. It seemed to swallow up all the light around it, save for its 2 shimmering green eyes. That thing laughed at its hollow toddler's voice, this time with malice and cruelty in it. The eyes never looked away from me, never blinking, focused only on me, like a predator before the pounce. Not wanting to give up on any ground to the predator, I stepped forward again. It didn't move. Not knowing what to do, I screamed as loud as I could. I waved my arms, trying futilely to shoo it away. The eyes shimmered, and as it stared back, the eye shifted from green to amber. I watched as it began to rise up into the air. It was now apparent to me this thing had been crouching and was now standing up. I could only watch in silent terror as the eyes finally stopped rising, nearly 10 feet off the ground. The night air erupted with a deep growl. I could feel the vibrations in my gut. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could see or hear teeth snapping and gnashing. My son in the tent behind me began to scream. That was the only time the eyes lost focus on me and shifted towards the screams of my child. My only reaction was to fire my gun into the air. The eyes immediately vanished. My ears were ringing, but I could hear the growls turn into shrieks, followed by a cacophony of crashing branches and undergrowth. I stood there until I couldn't hear the shrieking anymore. It trailed off deep into the trees. I was left with only the sound of the breeze in the treetops and the quiet sobbing of my child. Twilight was beginning to illuminate the forest. Shaking and exhausted, I sat down in the dirt in front of the tent. I tried to collect myself. Daddy, Daddy, where are you? My 5-year-old shouted. That got me out of my daze. I picked myself up and went into the tent to retrieve him. Putting him in the truck, I locked the doors and wasted little time breaking down camp. You're out of that camp and back on the road by the time the sun broke over the horizon. I have no idea what is in those woods. I do plan to camp in that area again, albeit without my family, and definitely with some friends. I want to find out more about this thing. Thankfully, my son didn't seem fazed by anything that happened that night. He thinks I was chasing a bear away from camp, and maybe he's right. I hope he is anyways. My son can't wait to go on another camping trip, but truthfully, I'm thinking the next family camping trip might be an RV park or even a motel. That's family camping, right? Man tried to grab my baby from me on flight. I've flown with my 1-year-old solo nearly a dozen times. Usually people are understanding / kind about me having a baby on my lap. And overall, he's a happy, easy baby. He's also very cute, so it's not uncommon for strangers to talk to him. Usually I don't mind. The last trip I took, I sat alone in my aisle when a man sitting by himself directly behind me. My baby was tired and fussing. I knew he was tired, but there's not a lot I could do until after we took off. Right out of the gate, the man behind was talking to my baby saying, "Oh, hi baby. Why sad baby? Cute baby." I smiled and replied that he was tired. "Sorry for the fuss, thank you." After takeoff, I started to get him settled for a nap. The man behind us continued to talk to my baby, putting his hand through the seats trying to grab its feet. Multiple times I asked him nicely to please stop. My baby was tired, you're distracting him. He just needs a nap. Finally, I sat my baby down next to him. He stood on the floor facing the seat next to me so that I could make him a bottle. The man behind me stood up and reached over my seat to pick him up. I immediately leaned forward to pick up my baby, saying, "No, thank you, I don't need help, please. No, thank you." The man pushed me back into my seat while mumbling, "Sweet baby, why baby cry?" I replied very loudly, "No," and quickly picked up my baby. I thought that was the end of that. I was wrong. I tried to rock my baby to sleep while desperately trying not to lose my cool. As I'm rocking my baby, the man behind me reached through our seats to grab my arm, saying, no rocking, you make him cry." I pulled free from him and yelled, "Do not touch me." Again. I thought that'd be the end. I started rocking the baby for a second time. This time, the man behind me reached both hands around either side of my seat to hold me in place, saying, No rocking, stop rocking." I'm somewhat embarrassed that I completely lost it, clutching my baby to my chest while struggling to get free of him. It hurt. I hit the call light while screaming, let me go, do not touch me. Let me go. He was still holding me by my arms when the flight attendants came running. I could barely get anything out of the flight attendants. Everyone around us was staring. I was sobbing, and all I could do was get out, that I could not sit there anymore, and for the love of God, please move me. The man behind me tried to move with me, but I told the flight attendants that I did not know him, and he could not come with me. I had a good cry in my new seat, but my baby immediately went to sleep. I was moved to be next to the flight attendant's seat. After calming down, I explained to the flight attendants what had happened. Multiple times the man that had been behind me got up to try to come back to my new seat, only to be turned around by one of the flight attendants. Towards the end of the flight, one of the flight attendants told me that they'd explained everything to the pilot, and the pilot had called the FBI and local police to escort the man off the flight. I would also be escorted off, as well as everyone around us that had watched everything happen. He cheered as he was escorted off. I had to interview with the FBI and nearly missed my next flight. Around my trip was done, I had to fly back going through the same airport. It was stressful and emotional, to say the least. Even knowing that he was banned from the airline and the airport, I haven't flown since. To the man that tried to grab my baby from me and then wouldn't let go of me, let's never fucking meet again. Semi-truck driver toying with me late at night. No explanation for it. In December of 2015, I was making a north-south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my young 20s, driving home from the semester break. I was driving through South Kentucky on I-65 around 11:30 p.m., still about an hour away from the city where I was going to stop for the night. There were no other cars on the road at all, and I had not seen any for a while. That part of I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes for each direction, in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in my rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing, clicked off the phone, and waited for the truck to pass. The truck got right even with my car, and instead of completing the pass, matched my speed and stayed beside me. Then the driver turned on a spotlight on the side of my truck, which shone directly into the cabin of my car and on my face. I was really confused, as I'd never seen a truck do anything like this before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed like a very long minute, and I was getting creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead. I slowed my speed so that the truck would finish passing me. The driver turned off the light and completed the pass, moving from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was very creeped out by this, slowed down some more, and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and this big rig. As soon as I moved into the leftmost lane, the truck matched my speed again and moved into the middle lane to come parallel to my car. The driver turned on the light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I am now confirmed that this truck driver was definitely following me and definitely being super creepy. I kept my gaze straight ahead because I felt like looking over would somehow make it worse. The truck turned off the spotlight and pulled in front of my car in the leftmost lane. I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up. I was probably going right around the speed limit again, 70 to 75 miles an hour. By the time I completed the merge, I saw the truck beginning to shift lanes towards me again and speeding up to match me. Before they could pull up next to me again, I decided it was time to get out of there, and I floored it. I sped up to maybe 90 miles an hour, the fastest I had ever driven in my life, and put it maybe a mile of distance between me and the truck before slowing down some. I looked up to the rearview mirror and I will never forget the image. This big orange tractor trailer, illuminated by the street lamps of the highway interchange, absolutely devouring the distance I had put between us. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed. I sped up again, but it did not matter. The truck caught up to me, pulled beside me, and turned on the spotlight again. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed, not daring to look over. It was at this time that I decided that my only advantage was the maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind the truck. They moved over into the right lane and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind this truck in its blind spot so that they could not see me. I saw a sign for an exit and decided this is how I would escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we came up on the exit. I waited until the last possible moment. Once the truck body was beyond the point where the exit split ways, I darted out from behind the truck into the exit. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far away from the interstate I should go and if the truck would come looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right by the interstate. I parked and got out. I inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage, thinking maybe the driver was trying to warn me of something that was wrong with my car. There was nothing wrong with it. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was long gone before getting back on the interstate and continuing to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I did not use I-65. Clown in the woods. I'm from the UK, if that's any context. So way back in 2016, when the whole killer clown epidemic was huge, I was walking through the woods at around 10 p.m. alone in order to get to a party or gathering that was happening in the secluded part of the forest. It was almost pitch black and I could barely see in front of my instead besides the flashlight on my phone, and everything seemed normal as I was walking to the party. I got to a long stretch of woods with no defined path, but it was the quickest way to the party, so I took it. As I got around midway through, I heard something to my left. I turned and saw a shadowy figure sat on a fallen log. I was understandably unnerved, but I couldn't make out if it was just shadows from the moonlight or if it was an actual person. I made the mistake of shining my phone light directly at it, and I was instantly terrified. Sat there, alone in the middle of the woods, was a large-ish man dressed as a clown with full face paint and sporting the creepiest smile imaginable. I tried to call 5 different people as I was passing him, and then I heard him get up behind me. I instantly started sprinting towards the end of the long stretch of path, which had a barbed wire fence down the side of it. During the sprint, I was pretending to be on my phone with one of my friends and I could hear him running after me, but there was no chance in hell that I would be turning around to see if I was right. When I got to the path, I jumped over the fence as fast as I could and sliced my hands open as I did so. I then turned around and kept running backwards as I saw the clown stood behind the fence just staring at me and smiling. I didn't stop running until I got to the party, and I was scared for a very long time after this. You have to bear in mind that there were so many rumors of people being killed by people dressed as clowns at the time, and while I will never know if the man had evil intentions or was just trying to scare me, it was extremely strange and scary to live through. So, in conclusion, killer clown man from the woods. Let's not meet.